Φίλες και φίλοι, έχουμε επιστρέψει μετά το σύντομο διαφημιστικό διάλειμμα εδώ στη Βεργίνα Τηλεόραση, Αποκαλυπτικά και Επίκαιρα, και στο δεύτερο μέρος της εκπομπής μας έχουμε τη χαρά να φιλοξενούμε την Dr. Heike Görtemaker, την ιστορικό από τη Γερμανία, που έχει γράψει ένα συγκλονιστικό πραγματικά βιβλίο με τίτλο «Η αυλή του Χίτλερ», όπου πραγματεύεται το θέμα των συνεργατών του Χίτλερ, των στενών συνεργατών, οι οποίοι αποτελούσαν τον κύκλο ο οποίος έμεινε μέχρι το τέλος μαζί του, ή κάποιοι από αυτούς έμειναν μέχρι το τέλος μαζί του. Θα μας τα πει όλα βεβαίως η κυρία Görtemaker, την οποία έχουμε μαζί μας. Good afternoon, Dr. Görtemaker.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your presence today in at Βεργίνα Television. We invited you because you made important research about the inner circle of Hitler, this personality of the last century that a lot of books have been written about him, but we didn't know about his inner circle, and you made the research and you have published a book, an interesting book that I have here, the Greek edition of the book, and from publication Görtemaker here in Greece. Before we start our conversation, I would like to share with you a video that we can see with the audience about the book in Greece, and then we return and have our conversation.
Okay.
Very interesting, this teaser about the book. And the first question, Dr. Görtemaker, is there is a ton of bibliography about the Second World War, about Adolf Hitler, Germany, the Third Reich, and his partners, Himmler, Goering, and the others. When did you discover that there is a gap in the bibliography about his inner circle, and you decide to do this research and have this book that brings new things in the research? We didn't know a lot of the things that you write in the book. So this is the first question. Why did you decide to do this research and write about his inner circle?
The idea to write about Hitler's inner circle came during my work on Eva Braun. Yeah. She was portrayed so far as totally meaningless, unpolitical, meaningless even for Hitler himself. And I discovered that this was untrue, that she was a vital part of his inner circle, that she had a strong position within his inner circle. And then I asked, what about all other men and women in his circle? What kind of function did they have? How important were they? And how came they together as circle around Hitler. What's the history of this circle? When you look at books on Hitler, biographies, these men and women, this private circle is not of importance. Hardly their names are mentioned. And therefore I decided to look into this secret circle around Hitler.
You mentioned Eva Braun, that you have written her biography. Eva Braun, the mistress of Hitler, she was a Nazi herself. She has this ideology, or she was the love interest of Hitler and only that?
All people around Hitler in his inner circle, and Eva Braun was a part of his inner circle, were believers. They shared his worldview, and she too. She was not only a passive bystander as portrayed so far, but she was a part of the Nazi ideology and part of his propaganda machinery, because she made pictures and films of Hitler at his Berghof retreat. And she sold her pictures and films to Heinrich Hoffmann and earned a lot of money. So she has to be seen as part of the inner circle, part of the propaganda machinery, and she was not only decoration on the Obersalzberg, as one historian once said.
While I was reading the book, Albert Speer was the main character on this book. With his actions, not only he managed to survive and survive the war, but escaped also the death penalty in the trials that followed. And after the war, he died in the early 80s. Also, although Hitler didn't tolerate any treason, Albert Speer wasn't arrested, although he was one of his closest associates. And while even Hermann Göring himself was arrested, Speer wasn't arrested or prosecuted by the Nazi regime. How would you characterize him? He managed to escape from Hitler when in the last days of the war he was preparing his after the war life about not being a Nazi, just an architect. It's an interesting personality.
Albert Speer was smart, ambitious, and vain, and he was as ruthless as the dictator he served. After the war, directly after the war, he managed to rewrite his history. And he claimed that he had nothing to do with National Socialism, that he never approved this kind of Nazi ideology, and that he was manipulated by Hitler, that he just was an architect and nothing to do with crimes, and was just an architect. And in Nuremberg, for instance, they had no proof of his crimes. They had no proof of his real involvement into the Nazi crimes, and therefore this saved his neck in Nuremberg. And but after then he got 20 years in prison, and in the 1960s he was released. And there were many publishers who wanted to publish his memoirs, because he was so close to Hitler, had been so close to Hitler, had been one of his best friends. And therefore his book, published in 1969, with the title Inside the Third Reich, became a world bestseller. Mm-hmm. And Speer wrote an exonerating story, because he said he had nothing to do with this, and he called Hitler a demon who had manipulated all others and who was ruthless and cynical and so on, no human being. a man without a private life who just worked for his cause. But this was a big lie, because Speer once was one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich, and he was the one who prolonged the war with his miracle weapons, the notion of miracle weapons, and his lies. And but this was a very attractive story for many Germans, because they thought, now, okay, if Speer didn't know about the crimes, and if Speer didn't really know about the character of Hitler, how should we have known? So if he's innocent, we are innocent too.
So the majority of the members of the inner circle of Hitler have the same attitude with Speer. They tried to save themselves near the end of the war. You wrote in the book that Himmler tried to negotiate to free some prisoners from the camps, to 20,000 of them. So all of them, they did that, or there were other fanatics that they never quit of these ideas, and they stand by Hitler even in the last minute?
In the end, there were just few who wanted to die with Hitler. Mm-hmm. Actually, Eva Braun, who from early on decided to die with Hitler one day, and Magda and Joseph Goebbels. They committed suicide in the Berlin bunker. Eva Braun and Hitler on April 30, and the Goebbels on May 1st. So most members of Hitler's inner circle tried to survive the war, like Speer, like also Himmler, Göring. They didn't want to die with him. Even Martin Bormann fled the bunker, and he wanted to survive. So, and they needed stories, exonerating stories for themselves, to distance themselves from Hitler, from the Nazi crimes. But many weren't really successful in doing this. Like Himmler, Himmler then committed suicide because his story couldn't convince anyone. But Speer was different. Speer was a young and good-looking man. He spoke many languages. He spoke French and English, and he was very eloquent. And even in Nuremberg, they wanted they wanted to believe that there had been a good Nazi, and they saw Speer as a good Nazi because he was eager to collaborate and to tell them how all this Nazi dictatorship functioned and so on. He was very eager to collaborate with the court there in Nuremberg. Uh-huh. So Speer was different, a different story. But all members of Hitler's inner circle who survived denied that they had any knowledge of the Holocaust.
I see. And how easy or how difficult it was to do this research, to find all the sources? Because here in the book we have a lot of sources, footnotes and everything, and it's an extraordinary work. How difficult or how easy it was to have access to these sources and talk with some sons or daughters, like the son of Nicolaus von Bello, and they wanted to talk about their fathers or mothers, about their association with Adolf Hitler.
It was very difficult to find all these sources because there is not one place where you find it. So you have to look into many papers, different papers and collections, and you had to read all old sources, so to speak, because no one really was interested in these people. They were viewed as just unimportant, especially the women, unimportant for Hitler and his politics. But it's on the contrary. He needed this close circle. But to discover this, that it was a totally different story with Hitler and his inner circle, I needed, for instance, the collection of Nikolaus von Below, who was very close to Hitler with his wife, Maria. They were friends. They were always on the Obersalzberg. They were friends with Eva Braun too. And his son, I'm very grateful to him that he let me look into the unpublished papers and unpublished correspondence of his father. This was very, very helpful to get an insight into the thinking of these people, how they came to Hitler, why they did like him. They saw him as a likable man, a very nice man, and they believed in his thoughts. They believed in the Nazi ideology to create a new, strong Germany and a new German Reich. They were very convinced of this idea, and they saw themselves as chosen by a very powerful dictator, and they were very proud of that they were part of this experience to build a new German Reich.
In the book, you have a chapter about self-preservation myth that they create the members of the inner circle of Hitler. Did this self-preservation myth work? Did the society bought these myths, or they failed?
Within the German society in the 1950s and 60s, these stories, exonerating stories, were attractive. It was a kind of broken society. The industry and has collapsed. The whole country was in ruins. The towns were in ruins. So the people now were eager to reconstruct and to live their daily lives. And there was this desire to forget about all this before and to come to a kind of normality again. And therefore, they bought these stories and they liked these stories because they could identify with these people, because many Germans had been members of the Nazi Party, around 8 million. So and many people were convinced, the majority of people liked Hitler, were convinced of his ideas. So therefore, these exonerating stories of the members of his former inner circle were very attractive, and they bought them.
Mm-hmm. And of all these personalities you described the book, who do you think was closer than the rest to Hitler in the extent that he could affect him?
You have to see that Hitler had two inner circles. After 1920, when he started his political career, from the beginning, he was surrounded by men and women who supported him, who financed him, who were friends and encouraged him because they saw in him a new political talent. So there were men and women around him, and he depended on these on this circle, because he needed money, he knew he needed support, even psychological support. This changed in 1933 when he came to power. This circle changed. Now he surrounded himself with people like Speer, who owed him their career. So in the first circle, very important were Rudolf Hess and his wife Ilse. They were close friends with Hitler. Also Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda, very, very close. Then Eva Braun and her sister, who lived on the Obersalzberg, she was very important for Hitler to back him. He always could rely on this girlfriend, so she was also important. And later, even Albert Speer and his wife, Annie Brandt, the physicians were very important, Karl Brandt and Theodor Morell. These people, and Nikolaus von Below and his wife, this was the core of the inner circle.
So all these were friends, they were friends of Hitler.
Yes, they were friends, and they had a special relationship of loyalty to him. And after 1945, they stayed loyal until their death. They were loyal believers and friends of Hitler, and they never were kind of illoyal, or they never said, there were no thinking of, or no remorse until their end.
Mm-hmm. And there are others that we don't mention in the book that because they weren't members of the inner circle of Hitler. There are Admiral Dönitz or Otto Skorzeny. All these people were soldiers that following orders, or they were also fanatical Nazis in the army, the high-rank officers.
This was also an exonerating story, that they just had obeyed orders, but in fact, many, or the majority of this important men, important politicians during the Third Reich were convinced of the Nazi ideology, and they supported Hitler. Hitler, when he became chancellor, a majority of people, even the old elites, wanted him as chancellor. They hated the first democracy in Germany. They thought that this democracy couldn't solve all the problems this country had, the economic and social problems emerging after the First World War. So they wanted a dictator, a kind of national regime in Germany, no democracy with all this discussing and debating, no action. They thought, we need someone who will take now decisions for our country, one person, and this would solve our problems. And therefore, all these people who afterwards said, oh, we just obeyed orders, in fact, they were convinced of Hitler, convinced of this national dictatorship after 1933.
So in the army, but also in the public administration, when was the real denazismization happened? In the 50s, in the 60s, or earlier?
The denazification began after 1945, after the surrender of the German Wehrmacht, and this was primarily an American project to re-educate, to punish the Nazis, and to re-educate these people, to make them, because the thinking was to establish a democracy, and therefore you have to re-educate these people who once believed in Hitler. But this project failed. because there were so many Nazis and you couldn't punish them all because this society had to function again. So the Americans and this project failed, and when the German Republic was founded in 1949, they wanted, you can say, a social peace in Germany. They wanted to reconstruct Germany and integrate all these former Nazis, these millions of Nazis, and therefore the notion of denazification faded and lost its importance.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have written the biography of Eva Braun and The Inner Circle of Hitler, two books that became bestsellers, very well accepted by the people and the historians, very good reviews. Now you are writing something new.
Yes, I'm writing again a biography of a woman who once was very important for Hitler, one of the most important propagandists in the Third Reich, together with Speer and Heinrich Hoffmann and Goebbels, Leni Riefenstahl. Oh. It's a biography on Leni Riefenstahl, her life.
The director.
Yes.
The famous director.
Yeah. Who made this still famous films on the Reichstags of the NSDAP and the Olympics in 1936. She was very famous even in the Third Reich, and afterwards she had a new career as a photographer after 1954.
So I have watched some of her films. There are masterpieces. Her films. So she was Leni Riefenstahl. She was a Nazi herself.
Leni Riefenstahl never had been a member of the Nazi Party, but she was very close to Hitler, and she could not have made these films without a conviction. Without the conviction that this is a good ideology, that she believed in Hitler. And this is a thing she said until her end, that she really believed in Hitler. She liked him, and she worked for him until the end of the war.
I see. So you are writing her biography. When you are going to publish it?
I hope in a few years, in 2 or 3 years. She left a huge collection of correspondence and papers, and it takes time to work through it.
So we will have the opportunity to talk again when you are going to publish this book, and we hope that you will publish it also in Greece, so the Greek audience have the chance to read it. Dr. Görtemaker, thank you very much for your presence today in Vεργίνα Television, and thank you for the interesting conversation that we have.
Thank you for having me.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Φίλες και φίλοι, αυτά λοιπόν από την Dr. Heike Görtemaker, την ιστορικό από τη Γερμανία, η οποία μας είπε για την αυλή του Χίτλερ. Αυτό είναι το βιβλίο από τις εκδόσεις Gutenberg, το οποίο πραγματικά μέσα σε 500 και σελίδες περιγράφει όλους αυτούς τους στενούς συνεργάτες του Χίτλερ, ο οποίος μόνο μοναχικός δεν ήταν από ό,τι αποδεικνύεται. Είχε έναν κύκλο φίλων και συνεργατών που μαζί τους καθόριζε τις εξελίξεις. Πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα συζήτηση. Λοιπόν, πάμε σε ένα σύντομο διαφημιστικό διάλειμμα και επιστρέφουμε.